Being that this was primarily an art history program, it makes sense that the majority of our time was spent in museums, and even more sense that we began in Florence, the home of the Renaissance. The Uffizi Museum, home of some of the greatest works of the Renaissance, started us off with a bang. Though the star of the show, Birth of Venus, lay in just the other room, I was truly enraptured by the Primavera. This wonderful and famous work of art by the great Botticelli depicts figures of ancient Roman mythology in a garden, but no story has been found that brings this particular group together. It depicts Zephyrus kidnapping Chloris, who turns into the goddess of spring. In the center stands Venus with a cupid over her head, pointing towards the dancing three graces, followed by Mercury, who raises his caduceus towards the clouds. On the top lies a tribute to the Medici symbolized by an orange grove. Most critics agree that the painting is an allegory based on the lush growth of spring, but accounts of any precise meaning vary, though its depiction of rebirth, or Renaissance if you will, is paramount as a staple in art history. An excellent example of mannerism with its elongated limbs is Madonna with the long neck. The composition shows a majestic Madonna seated on a throne clad in luxurious robes, with the elongated form of the infant Jesus on her lap. The latter lies with outstretched arms and closed eyes, prefiguring a redemptive death on the cross and the lamentation to come. 6 angels cluster in the space on Madonna's right to adore both mother and child, an action echoed in the figure of Saint Jerome, who is closely associated with the adoration of the Virgin Mary. The painting was begun in 1534 for the funerary chapel of Francesco Tagliafieri in Parma, but remained incomplete on Parmigiano's death in 1540, which can be seen in the incomplete pillars and disembodied feet on the bottom right. The Virgin Mary and Child are depicted in the foreground and form a triangular shape with the Magi kneeling in adoration. Behind them is a semicircle of accompanying figures, including what may be a self-portrait of the young Leonardo on the far right. The cleaning process was carried out on the non-original materials that had been added to the surface over time. Their thickness was only thinned down gradually and to varying degrees depending on the conditions of which the individual area in each figure. X-rays revealed that the majority of the paint was added by other artists after Leonardo left the work unfinished, and provided information on Leonardo's creative process and technique. This particular painting, executed by Artemisia Gentileschi, is one of the bloodiest and most vivid depictions of the scene, surpassing the version by Caravaggio in its immediacy and shocking realism. Artemisia was certainly familiar with Caravaggio's painting of the subject. Her father, Orazio, who was responsible for her artistic training, was Caravaggio's friend and artistic follower. Caravaggio's painting inspired and perhaps even challenged the young Artemisia. A comparison between the two reveals not only her debt to the older artist, but also a series of pointed modifications that heighten the intensity of the physical struggle, the quantity of blood spilled, and the physical and psychological strength of Judith and her maidservant Abara. It is likely that Artemisia drew from personal experience with her own rape, in which she tried to fend off her attacker with a knife. Especially significant is Artemisia's portrayal of Abara as youthful, strong, and fully engaged in assisting Judith, in striking contrast to the chaperone who purposely abandoned Artemisia in her hour of need. In this painting, Artemisia adds a small detail that supports her identification with Judith. One of the cameos on Judith's bracelet appears to depict Artemis, the ancient goddess of both chastity and the hunt. Through a hallway lined with Michelangelo's slaves, unfinished works of figures trying to break free of the marble in which their master has left them, lies the breathtaking David. The 17-foot marble statue of a standing male nude represents the biblical hero David, a favored subject in the art of Florence. Originally commissioned as one of a series of statues of prophet to be positioned along the roofline of the east end of the Florence Cathedral, the giant statue was placed instead in a public square outside Palazzo della Signora, the seat of the civic government in Florence, due to both its size and its excellence. Because of the nature of the hero it represented, the statue soon came to symbolize the defense of civil liberties embodied in the Republic of Florence, an independent city-state threatened on all sides by more powerful rival states, and by the hegemony of the Medici family. The eyes of David, which are a warning glare, were turned towards Rome. The proportions of some details are atypical in Michelangelo's work. The figure has an unusually large head and imposing right hand. These enlargements may be due to the fact that the statue was originally intended to be placed on the cathedral roofline, so important parts of the sculpture had been necessarily accentuated in order to be visible from below. Just one of the many Davids we would come to see. It is sometimes claimed that Verrocchio modeled the statue after a handsome pupil in his workshop, the young Leonardo da Vinci. The placement of Goliath's head has been a source of some debate for art historians. When exhibited at the National Gallery of Art, the head was placed between David's feet, as is the case in the statue's permanent home. Another school of art historians has suggested that Verrocchio intended Goliath's head to be placed to David's right, pointing to the diagonals of the ensemble. Donatello's bronze statue of David is famous as the first unsupported standing work of bronze cast during the Renaissance, and the first freestanding nude male sculpture made since antiquity. It depicts David in an enigmatic smile, posed with one foot on Goliath's severed head, just after defeating the giant. The youth is completely naked apart from a laurel-topped hat and boots, and bearing the sword of Goliath. The creation of the work is entirely undocumented, and it has been given a range of datings. At the age of 21, Michelangelo went to Rome for the first time, and we still possess two of the works he created during this period, the Pietà and the Bacchus. The statue of the Bacchus was commissioned by banker Jacopo Galli for his garden, and he wanted it fashioned after the models of the ancients. Bacchus is depicted with rolling eyes, his staggering body almost teetering off the rocky outcrop on which he stands. Sitting behind him is a fawn who eats a bunch of grapes slipping out of Bacchus's left hand. With its swollen breast and abdomen, the Bacchus figure suggests both the slenderness of a young man and the fleshiness and roundness of a woman, and its androgynous quality has often been noted. The sense of precariousness resulting from a high center of gravity can be found in a number of later works by the artist, most notably the David. The marble was flawed by a dark vein in the armpit, which frustrated Michelangelo and led him to be especially particular in choosing the marble for his future works. One of the gems of this museum are the two quatrefoils depicting the sacrifice of Isaac by Ghiberti and Brunelleschi respectively. In 1401, the Cloth Importers Guild announced a competition to design doors to the baptistry, and the finalists were these two men. Brunelleschi went on to study architecture in Rome and eventually ended up designing the Duomo of Florence, while Ghiberti retained the commission and created the set of doors which now reside in the Duomo Museum. The original location for those doors was the east side of the baptistry, replaced now with replicas, but the doors were moved to the north side of the baptistry after Ghiberti completed his second commission known as the Gates of Paradise. The gates have been praised by generations of artists and art historians for its compelling portrayal of scenes from the Old Testament. Over time, the 17-foot-tall, 3-ton bronze doors became an icon of Renaissance, one of the most famous works of art in the world. The workmanship of panels demonstrates that Florentine artists had mastered linear perspective and the classical idiom by the 15th century. Though the penitent Magdalene was the usual depiction of many single figures of Mary Magdalene in art, Donatello's gaunt, emaciated figure differs greatly from most depictions, which show a beautiful young woman in nearly perfect health. In addition, the wooden figure stands stark against the sea of marble sculptures of the Renaissance. The sculpture was probably commissioned for the baptistry at Florence, though it is unsure. The Magdalene penitent is famous for the detailed and very realistic carvings of the statue. Donatello's depiction is similar to, and very probably influenced by Eastern Orthodox icons of Mary of Egypt, which show a similar emaciated figure. He thus ignored Western legends by which Mary was daily fed by angels in the desert. Michelangelo made the Florence Pietà to decorate his tomb in Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome. Michelangelo began to work on the sculpture around the age of 72, without commission. Michelangelo worked tirelessly into the night with just a single candle to illuminate his work. Vasari wrote that he began to work on the piece to amuse his mind and to keep his body healthy. After 8 years of working on the piece, Michelangelo would go on to attempt to destroy the work in a fit of frustration. This marked the end of Michelangelo's work on the piece, and from there the piece found itself in the hands of Francesco Bedini, who hired an apprentice sculptor by the name of Tiberno to restore the work to its current composition. The difference of the work can be seen in the face of Mary Magdalene, opposing the delicate care Michelangelo put into the body of Christ. The face of Nicodemus under the hood is considered to be a self-portrait of Michelangelo himself. Four Crowned Martyr Saints is notable for being the only sculpture at Orsa Michele whose subject represents the guild members as much as their religious patrons. The four saints are easily conflated with the four consuls who served the guild masters. Beyond their intertwined identities as sculptors and saints, Nani's four men, grave but interacting easily with one another, can be seen as paradigms for the contemplative camaraderie at the heart of the guild system. The saint's identification with the guild members is reinforced by the lively marble relief at the base of the niche, where they are depicted not as martyrs but as masons, carvers, and sculptors busy at work, their profession seemingly more important than their faith. No information is available as to the destination of the painting and who it was commissioned by. Still in its sketch state, it is one of the most enigmatic works of the great Tuscan painter, sculptor, architect, engineer, and philosopher. The earliest mention of Saint Jerome dates, in fact, to the beginning of the 19th century when it was attributed to Leonardo in the will of a Swiss painter, Angelica Kaufmann. On Kaufmann's death, all trace of it again disappeared, until it was found by chance and purchased by Napoleon's uncle, Cardinal Joseph Fesch. According to tradition, the cardinal discovered the painting divided in two parts. The painting, commissioned by the Congregation of St. Jerome of Charity for the church of the same name in Villa Giulia in Rome, was executed by Domenichino between 1611 and 1614. The Bolognese painter had come to this city in 1602, called by his fellow citizen Annibale Carracci, for whom he worked in the Farnese Gallery. The Communion of St. Jerome constitutes its first important recognition in Rome, and, except for some rare cases, excited the enthusiastic approval of his contemporaries, who considered it among the masterpieces of Italian art. The subject, which is quite rare, is that of St. Jerome, who, by now of 90 years of age, on the point of death wants to take his last communion surrounded by his disciples in St. Paula. This colossal statue of the Nile was found in 1513 in Campo Marzio, where it was probably part of the decoration in Isso Campanis, dedicated to the Egyptian deities of Isis and Seriphus. The river is shown as a venerable old man stretched out on his side with a cornucopia of fruit in his left arm and ears of wheat in his right hand. Egypt is represented by the presence of a sphinx on which the figure of the Nile supports himself. The scene is enlivened by 16 children who allude to the 16 cubits of water by which the Nile rises for its annual flood. The sculpture was probably inspired by a monumental statue of the Nile in black basalt, a masterpiece of Alexandrian Greek sculpture. The statue of Laocoon and his sons, also called the Laocoon Group, has been one of the most famous ancient sculptures ever since it was excavated in Rome in 1506 and placed on public display in the Vatican, where it remains. It is very likely the same statue that was praised in the highest terms by the main Roman writer on art, Pliny the Elder. The figures are near life-size and the group is a little over 16 feet and 17 inches in height, showing the Trojan priest Laocoon and his son Antiphanes in Thyambrius being attacked by sea serpents. When the statue was discovered, Laocoon's right arm was missing, along with part of the hand on one child and right arm on the other, and various sections of the snake. The older son, on the right, was detached from the other two figures. The age of the altar used as a seat of Laocoon remains uncertain. Artists and connoisseurs debated on how the missing parts should be interpreted. Michelangelo suggested that the missing right arms were originally bent back over the shoulder. Others, however, believed that it was more appropriate to show the right arm extended outwards in a heroic gesture. This gilded bronze statue was found in 1864 beneath the courtyard of the Palazzo Pio Righetti near Campo de' Fiori. At the moment of discovery, the statue was lying horizontally in a trench, covered by a slab of travertine on which the letters FCS, standing for Fulgur Conditium Semenium, had been cut. The statue had therefore been struck by lightning and, following the Roman custom, had been granted a ritual burial together with the remains of a lamb. It shows a young Hercules leaning on a club with the skin of the Nemean lion over his arm and the apples of Hesperides in his left hand. One aspect of our course required that we give a lecture on a piece of work to our peers and professors, and I was able to snag a bit of the lovely Hannah's presentation on the Discobulus.
And the first one I want to talk about is the Lanceloti sculpture, also known as the Columbaro Discobulus. And it was created in the 2nd century CE. And as you can see with the figure, it's very idealistic, very classical. It was actually found out that this pose itself is actually not ideal for discus throwing. It's a very unnatural gait and posture. It has actually a bit of a dark history. It was actually sold to Adolf Hitler, and as an example of the Aryan race. But it was taken back from Germany to Italy in 1948. Its size is 155 centimeters. Fun fact.
A massive sculpture in white marble depicts the terrifying moment when two brothers tie a woman to a raging bull as punishment for the woman's ill treatment of their mother. Now a main attraction in the Naples National Archaeological Museum, the sculpture was found in pieces during the 16th century excavations of the Baths of Caracalla to find antiquities to decorate the Farnese family palazzo in Rome. One of the most extraordinary features of the sculpture is not just the size, a little under 4 meters high and a base of 3 by 3 meters, but the fact that it was carved from a single block of marble. Boy with a Basket of Fruit was completed by Caravaggio when he was new to Rome and relatively unknown in the art world. The model for the boy in the painting was Caravaggio's good friend Mario Mitini, who was 16 at the time and who would serve as one of his models many times in the future. The image needs no explanation. It's as if Caravaggio had stopped a delivery boy on his way to a cavalier's dining room with a basket ready arranged for lunch and had preserved the instant as fresh and crisp as the fruit itself. As a realist painter, Caravaggio did not idealize his paintings. Instead, he captured the very essence of what he saw on the canvas in front of him. This is beautifully clear in his portrayals of the fruits and leaves in the basket, which are so realistic that they have been analyzed by horticultural scientists who are able to accurately determine the individual cultivars. On May of 1606, Caravaggio was accused of murder and fled from Rome to distant lands to escape the price that had been placed on his head. His self-portrait as Goliath's severed head, held by David, his executioner, was sent to the papal court in 1610 as a kind of painted petition for pardon. David assumes the pose traditional for allegories of justice, with a sword in the right hand, but with scales instead of the head in the left. This David does not stand proud or arrogant like past iterations we've seen. There's a dis-ease in his gaze as he looks towards the severed head. Caravaggio's sardonic representation of himself as Goliath is despairing. It is a harrowing portrait, streaming blood, the forehead bruised, the eyes uncoordinated. Caravaggio has portrayed himself as damned. David is a life-size marble sculpture by Gian Lorenzo Bernini. The sculpture was one of many commissions to decorate the villa of Bernini's patron, Cardinal Borghese, where it still resides today as part of the Galleria Borghese. It was completed in the course of 7 months, from 1623 to 1624. The subject of the work is the biblical David, about to throw a stone that will bring down Goliath, and will allow David to behead him. Compared to earlier works on the same theme, notably the David of Michelangelo, the sculpture broke new ground in its implied movement and its psychological intensity. The Rape of Proserpina is a large Baroque marble sculpture group by Bernini, executed between 1621 and 1622. Bernini was only 23 years old at its completion. It depicts the abduction of Proserpina, where Proserpina is seized and taken to the underworld by the god Pluto. Most critics have been quick to praise the work. Howard Hibbard noticed the realistic effects that Bernini has achieved via carving hard marble, such as the texture of the skin, the flying ropes of hair, and the tears of Persephone, and above all, the yielding flesh of the girl. The choice of an incident to depict the story is commonly cited as well. Pluto's hands encircle the waist of Proserpina just as she throws out her arm in an attempt to escape. Bernini's own son and biographer, Domenico, called it an amazing contrast of tenderness and cruelty. Others have remarked on the twisted contrapposto pose of the group. While reminiscent of mannerism, particularly the rape of the Sabine woman, Bernini permits the viewer to absorb the scene from one single viewpoint. While other views provide further details, a spectator can see the desperation of Persephone while the lumbering attempts of Pluto to grab her. This was in contrast to the mannerist sculpture of Jean Bologna, which required the spectator to walk around the sculpture to gain a view of each of the characters' expressions. As for my own experience, I was eager to see the sculpture in real life, having been a fan of Bernini's way with marble for quite some time. The way he makes cold stone turn into supple flesh never ceases to astound me, and I would almost guess that he was Medusa with the way he traps life into such a stationary thing. Overall, these masterpieces can't be done justice by picture or video, and the way they command a room can only be experienced in person. Some draw the eye instantly, while others ease you in, but you become enchanted all the same.